This video is brought to you by my fantastic supporters over at Patreon. Go to patreon.com/TJTheEmperor to find out how you can support the channel.
And now, our feature presentation.
Final Fantasy VII is a game I've wanted to talk about since literally the first day I started making regular content for this channel. But, as some of you are aware, so far I've only touched on it in passing. There are a few reasons for this. For one, as I've repeatedly mentioned in the past, it's my favorite game of all time. The thought of trying to write something worthy of the large place...
A large place?
It's held in my heart is, to put it mildly, daunting. To add to that, it's probably among the most talked about video games in the history of the medium, and as some of you are also well aware, in my videos I tend to focus on more lesser-known titles, partly because it's easier to say something novel about them. Well, you know what? I'm not going to let that stop me. It's something I want to talk about, so fuck it, I'm going to do it. That being said, since the world doesn't need yet another piece on the death of Aerith or Cloud's relationship with Sephiroth, I'm going to focus my attention on a facet of Final Fantasy VII's narrative that is, comparatively, much less discussed. The story of Barret and Dyne. Barret is, of course, one of the most famous characters in Final Fantasy VII, for good reason. He's got a striking design, an unimpeachable sense of mission, and a command of language that is, powerful, let's just say that. His relationship with Dyne, his childhood friend from their hometown of Corel, takes up a relatively insignificant amount of screen time, which makes it easy, I think, for it to get lost among the multitudes of Final Fantasy VII's other, much more famous moments. And yet, their story has always seized my imagination, and today, over 25 years after I first encountered it, that story has not only retained its pride of place in my mind, but also seems a singular, powerful example in miniature of the themes Squaresoft wished to explore in Final Fantasy VII. This video will be my deep dive into that story, and my arguments for why it should be held in the highest esteem among anyone who plays the game. In the most literal sense, Barret gets the first word in Final Fantasy VII. When Cloud leaps off the train outside Mako Reactor number 1, the first line of dialogue we read does not come from him, but from his Avalanche superior. "Come on, newcomer, follow me." Laconic as it is, the line does a decent job telling us exactly what we need to know about Barret from the get-go. He's a no-nonsense leader who you don't want to mess with. Combine that with his imposing character design, memorably featuring a gun grafted onto his right arm, and yeah, it's no wonder that most of his subordinates in Avalanche usually just tend to do what they're told. But Barret is far from the one-dimensional strongman these early scenes suggest. This is a man who cares deeply about the world he lives in. He understands Shinra's Mako reactors are a ticking time bomb for the planet's health, and will stop at nothing to ensure they're both wiped off the map, and Shinra held responsible for its crimes. For him, the cause really is the only thing that matters, and he cares not one bit about who he offends to make that cause a reality. We can see this early on in his dealings with the rest of Avalanche. Barret more or less refuses to leave Cloud's side because, at this early stage, he can't be certain he's 100% committed to the mission. Now, think about it. If Cloud really is an ex-soldier, he could probably cut Barret to ribbons without a second thought, and given his, let's just say prickly disposition, he probably isn't too keen on having this loudmouth jackass basically become his Siamese twin for the entirety of their mission. Barret's just asking to get his ass handed to him, and yet he refuses to change course. For a more mundane example, when Wedge asks Barret about their payment on the train back to Sector 7, Barret responds, quite flippantly I should add, nothing, sorry. Whether or not you agree with Barret's assessment that the rest of his crew are a bunch of screw-ups, they are putting both their freedom and their lives on the line for Avalanche's cause. One would think they're owed a bit more than Barret's dismissal. All this to say, it's not hard to find any number of ways to dislike Barret at this juncture. But once we get to Sector 7, and Avalanche returns to their hideout in Tifa's 7th Heaven bar, Barret once again finds ways to surprise us. The very first thing he does upon entering 7th Heaven is to hold his daughter, Marlene. At this point, I'm sure the last thing anyone was expecting would be for this overly brash eco-terrorist to care one bit for a prepubescent girl, but he does. And even with the limited capabilities of Final Fantasy VII's graphics, you can see the way he interacts with Marlene is genuine. Indeed, we soon find out that one of the reasons why he's so cautious with the group's money is because he's trying to save enough to ensure she gets a good education. So even at this early stage, we can see that Barret is a character of extremes. He's a no-nonsense terrorist mastermind who simultaneously, at his core, has a good heart who wants to do right for his daughter. Now, for a little while after this point, Barret's story takes a back seat. He ends up getting separated from Cloud and Tifa after the destruction of the No. 5 reactor. Cloud, of course, ends up meeting Aerith in the Sector 5 slums, whereas Tifa goes undercover in Wall Market to see if she can squeeze some information out of Don Corneo regarding Shinra's next move. Cloud and Aerith rendezvous with Tifa at Corneo's mansion, where the fat Don reveals Shinra intends to literally crush Avalanche by dropping Midgar's upper plate onto Sector 7. Horrified, the three make their way back to Sector 7, where, though they've arrived before the plate falls, they've also arrived after the war between Shinra and Avalanche has spilled out onto the streets. It's at this point where we witness the two extreme facets of Barret's personality at perhaps their most polarized. The Avalanche leader is standing atop the pillar, firing his gun at what seems like anything that moves. It's obvious that he sees this fight as Avalanche's last stand. If Shinra is this determined to wipe them out, he's not going to hold anything back. Unfortunately, in spite of his resistance, all he can do is delay the inevitable. And in fact, one could argue that his actions hurt Avalanche's cause much more than they help. I don't know if this was the intent of the developers, but looking at how the scene is framed, one could easily make the argument that it was Barret himself who was inadvertently responsible for shooting Wedge, as he appears to be caught in his friendly fire. If this is in fact the case, then we can read this as an early, indirect way of the game suggesting that Avalanche's terrorism will only lead to more tragedy, and not long-term success. Of course, the plate falls, crushing not only Wedge, but also Biggs and Jesse, who are also injured on the pillar, and ostensibly Marlene and everyone else in Sector 7. As the party reconvenes in the Sector 6 slums, staring at the rubble of what used to be their home, Barret becomes completely unhinged, firing his gun into the ruins as he screams the names of his daughter and fallen comrades. This is not anger, this is pure, unfiltered grief at its most heartbreaking. To me, this confirms it. As rough an exterior as Barret may put on, at his core, he wants to do the right thing, even if the decisions he makes aren't always the best ones. This is reinforced a few seconds later when Tifa reveals to Barret that Marlene is still alive and waiting at Aerith's house in the slums. From here on out, we get the sense that maybe Barret is reevaluating his past decisions. At this point, it's admittedly very subtle, but it's progress nonetheless. Barret's next course of action is not to plan another terrorist attack, but to assist in rescuing Aerith, who had been captured by Shinra and brought to their headquarters to be studied. And after the party has rescued Aerith and decides to go after Sephiroth, he allows Cloud to take his place as leader. Admittedly, he's reluctant to do this, but he does it anyway, which tells me that, though he may be used to positions of authority, he's willing to step back if doing so means it will be beneficial to their mission. Barret's story once again takes a back seat once the party leaves Midgar and they begin chasing Sephiroth, a chase which leads them literally across the world. After receiving a tip from Shinra's Professor Hojo in Costa del Sol, telling them to head west, the party hikes across Mount Corel, eventually reaching the rundown mining town of North Corel. As the party enters the town, its citizens hold nothing back when they realize Barret is among them, heaping upon him all manners of abuse and straight up accusing him of being the reason why North Corel is in the shape that it's in. One would expect Barret to respond with one of his endless strings of obscenities, but he doesn't. Not only is he shockingly soft-spoken, he openly admits that their accusations are all true. The party reconvenes outside the ropeway leading to the Gold Saucer, where Barret fills them in on exactly what happened, and it's at this point Dyne finally makes his appearance onto the stage. 4 years ago, the town of Corel found itself at a crossroads. Faced with a world that was quickly leaving coal behind, the town leaders decided to meet with Shinra to discuss the possibility of building a Mako reactor nearby. Again, one would expect Barret to shoot the proposal down without a second thought, but again, he doesn't. The one who takes issue with the plan is Dyne. Dyne, Barret's closest friend, is a man who cares deeply about Corel's coal mining history, and will absolutely not bring himself to sign away the future of his home so carelessly. Barret is the level-headed one in this conversation, helping Dyne to understand not only that the move away from coal is an inevitable sign of the times, but how doing so will help the families of Corel improve their lives, which for him is the only thing that matters. Though under obvious protest, Dyne eventually acquiesces, and Shinra builds the reactor outside of Corel. Flash forward to sometime after the reactor's completion. Barret and Dyne were on their way back to Corel after being out of town for a few days, when they happened upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. Corel was burned to the ground by Shinra's troops. Apparently there was an explosion at the reactor, and Shinra, blaming the explosion on a rebel faction, destroyed the town in retribution. It's never specified, by the way, who or what caused the explosion, but context makes it more than likely that it was a false flag attack done to ensure Shinra's total domination of the reactor and its windfall profits. Regardless of cause, the end result is the same. Corel was destroyed, and all of its citizens murdered in cold blood. Though ostensibly some were able to escape that fate, those few survivors would found the town of North Corel near the ruins of their old home, after all. Most did not, and this includes both Barret and Dyne's families. One wishes Barret would continue with his story here. Much like how the party reacted to Cloud's abrupt cessation of the tale of his encounter with Sephiroth, it's obvious that there's more to Barret and Dyne's story that's yet to be told. After all, how were they able to survive? We're gonna have to wait a little longer for those answers, as the ropeway operator tells the party that this is their last chance to travel to Gold Saucer. They do, and decide to use the opportunity to both search the amusement park for Sephiroth while simultaneously indulging in some much-needed R&R. Given everything they've experienced as of late, the party, Aerith especially, seems excited to indulge. Barret is the one exception. He's arguably the most ornery we've seen him in since the game's beginning. Declaring he's in no mood to have fun, he runs off on his own, leaving the rest of the party to their own devices. Now, I want to pause for a moment to establish Barret's story arc within the context of Final Fantasy VII as a whole. In his excellent book, Reverse Design Final Fantasy VII, Pat Holleman argues, correctly it seems to me, that every major character in the game can be seen through the paradigm of a group of trauma responses he calls the Survivors Trio. To quickly provide definitions, that trio is 1. That the character has lost the world that defined them, 2. That the character has had a near-death experience, and 3, that the character has someone or something that connects them to their past and motivates them in their quest. I don't feel I need to modify Holleman's definitions, except to add that the first two parts are almost always linked. The near-death experience will more than likely be directly connected to the loss of the world that defined them, a physical scar to forever remind them of the metaphysical loss of their old world, if you will. Examining Barret through this paradigm, we can see how perfectly he conforms to it. Though we're still a little fuzzy on the details, he survived Shinra's assault on Corel, an assault which led to the complete annihilation of the town and almost everyone in it. His daughter Marlene, another survivor of the disaster, is the one who connects him to his old world and propels him onward in his quest, as we've already seen during the avalanche scenes in Midgar. All this should make clear why Barret reacts as he does when the party reaches the Gold Saucer. Though the game does not make this clear, it seems to me that, after Barret survived the assault on Corel and rescued Marlene, the two never returned to their hometown again. They packed up for Midgar, formed Avalanche, and remained there ever since. It's entirely realistic that Barret assumed he and Marlene were the only survivors, that outside of their memories, Corel was dead, the reactor serving as its tombstone. Assuming that hypothetical is true, I want you to imagine what must have been going through Barret's head as the party made their way across Mount Corel. He's basically returned to the scene of his trauma. Hell, the Corel reactor is clearly visible every time your party enters battle, almost as if it's taunting him. But because the rest of the party doesn't know his story, and he doesn't seem the type to open up about it, he doesn't say anything, which must just be eating away at him inside. And then, once they finish crossing the mountain, they find North Corel, a new village founded by survivors of the tragedy. Imagine, he probably had no idea North Corel even existed until they walked into it, and now here he is, face to face with the resurrected hometown he blames himself for having destroyed, even with some of the survivors from that hometown who arguably hates him even more than he hates himself, and, well, I'm sure you can see why Barret reacted the way he did. His survivor's guilt manifests in a stunned, almost silent apologetics, and his fury, probably equally directed at himself, Shinra, and the world itself, manifests inside the Gold Saucer. We'd like to believe that Barret has made progress in his journey up to this point, but his reaction here, understandable as it may be, raises the real question of whether that progress was meaningful. That question becomes all the more pressing as Cloud enters the Gold Saucer's battle square, where he finds the aftermath of an all-out massacre. At first believing it to be the work of Sephiroth, he realizes that's impossible once he examines the bodies more closely, finding them all dead by gunshot. Horrifying as this scene is, it becomes even more so when, after talking to the lone survivor, he discovers the massacre was perpetrated by a man with a gun on his arm. This is such a brilliantly framed scene. Like I said in the previous paragraph, we want to believe Barret has made progress, that he could not succumb to such a despicable act, but the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that he was the one who did it. Before the party can even begin to process that possibility, the owner of the gold saucer, Dio, accuses them of the massacre and throws them into the Corel prison. The party finds Barret almost immediately afterwards, but before they can get anything out of him, he tells them to stay back, saying this is something he needs to deal with on his own. Such a response does nothing to clear the cloud of suspicion, and indeed, until the very last second, when the party basically forces the truth out of him inside an abandoned house, it remains an open question whether or not Barret was, in fact, responsible for the murders in the gold saucer. That tension is quickly deflated when Barret tells us what we've been hoping to hear, that it wasn't him, that there was another man with a gun on his arm, his best friend, Dyne. Finally, we hear the finale of his and Dyne's story. On their way back into town, an elderly villager tells the two men of Shinra's attack, and even from this great distance, they can see the flames towering over the horizon. Dyne tells Barret there still may be time to rescue their neighbors. At that moment, however, a unit of Shinra soldiers, led by Scarlet, the same woman who promised them the world if they signed over the rights to the Corel reactor, murders the elderly man in cold blood. Barret and Dyne attempt to escape, but in the process, Dyne slips off the cliff. Barret holds him steady, saying the two of them have to get back to Eleanor and Marlene. This gives Dyne a bit more strength to hold on until a bullet hits the two men in their hands, causing Dyne to fall. Afterwards, Barret got an artificial arm to replace the one that was shot. After a short time, he replaced that artificial arm with a gun to better aid him in his revenge on Shinra. The doctor who performed the operation told him that there was one other man who got the same procedure, thus indirectly confirming Dyne survived his fall. Tifa thinks, if Dyne went through the same trauma that Barret did, maybe he would join their fight against Shinra. Barret dismisses it outright, once again saying he has to find Dyne on his own. Cloud and the rest of the party more or less refuses to let him have his way, saying they need him in order to accomplish their mission. Barret acquiesces, and the party starts to search for Dyne together. Alright, so I'm gonna pause again, because we have enough new information to fill in some more blanks. When Barret deserted the party in the gold saucer, he didn't go on any psychotic rampage. He was probably just wandering in an attempt to work off the myriad stress and anger this unexpected return to the scene of his trauma brought on. In the course of his wanderings, he likely happened upon the crime scene before the rest of his party, and deduced it to be the work of his old friend. Hell, he may have even caught a glimpse of him in the act. Thus he tracks him, determined to get an answer, any answer, out of him. One question remains, though. How exactly did he get into Corel prison? The way Dio acts when condemning the rest of the party makes it seem, at least to me, that he hadn't dealt with Barret. Further, the way Barret carries himself in the desert prison is far too domineering and commanding, almost as if he's returned to an old haunting ground, and that's because that's exactly what happened. As far as I know, the game's script does not explicitly state that Corel Prison is built on the ruins of Barret's hometown, but it is. I haven't had the chance, so far in this video, to gush about the beauty of Final Fantasy VII's pre-rendered backgrounds. Obviously, they're gorgeous, and the fact that pre-rendered background design has more or less become a lost art in video games is a goddamn tragedy. Aside from this self-evident beauty, these backgrounds can convey meaning in a way that, due to the technological limitations of the original PlayStation, cinematography could not yet accomplish. Pay attention to the building where the party re-encounters Barret. A close look reveals that it's the decaying remains of the house where he, Dyne, and the rest of the elders of Corel signed away their future to Scarlet and her goons at Shinra. It makes sense for Barret to search for Dyne at this specific spot, because it appears Dyne has made the Corel prison his own personal hell on Earth. Talking to some of the NPCs around the area reveals the existence of a prison strongman known only as the Boss, whose permission is essential for anyone seeking their freedom. Again, the game does not tell us this right now, but we'll soon learn this boss is indeed Dyne. He's become so scarred by the trauma of Shinra's attack that, rather than move on, he's condemned himself to act as lord over what used to be his home. If I was Barret, that house is probably the first place I would look to, and even though he ends up not being there, Given how close Barret and Dyne used to be, it seems only a matter of time before he succeeds in his search. The last thing I'll add is the relative ease in which Barret decides to abandon his solo search and continue with the party is a much-needed reinforcer of his humanity after it's so repeatedly been called into question. Anyway, just as I predicted, with Barret in tow, it doesn't take long for the party to find Dyne, near the ruins of a house situated on the edge of a cliff. The reunion of these old friends is surprisingly level-headed, until, without warning, Dyne fires his gun arm at Barret. He admits the only reason why he hadn't hunted Barret down is because the voice of his dead wife, Eleanor, told him not to, indirectly admitting that he is, in fact, the murderer they've been looking for. Barret, in another sign of his humanity, apologizes to him, even though he doesn't have anything to apologize for. The survivor's guilt he carried from when he let him go during Scarlet's attack has never truly left him. Despite this, Barret asks him, point blank, why he's become this psychopathic murderer, who's hunting down even those who had nothing to do with the attack. Dyne straight up says the whys don't matter. Those answers won't bring the dead of Corel back to life. But because Barret's curious, Dyne says that he wants to destroy everything and everyone. The aftermath of Shinra's attack has left him with nothing. He's lost Corel, he's lost his wife Eleanor, and he's lost Marlene. Yes, the bombshell revelation here is that Marlene isn't actually Barret's daughter at all, but Dyne's. Barret found her among the ruins of Corel after the fire, and has raised her as his own daughter ever since. With this revelation, we can make another observation about the setting of this scene. The edge of the cliff is dotted with two crosses, one small, one large. A clear memorial for the only two human beings Dyne gives a damn about anymore. With that in mind, it's not too much of a stretch to imagine we're probably at the ruins of what used to be Dyne's old house in Corel. If Pat Holleman is correct in defining the game's major characters as manifesting the survivors trio, Dyne appears to be lacking the third part. He has no actual people to tie him to the world he's lost, just these empty tombs, and perhaps this is one reason why he's so beyond repair. In any case, using the knowledge of Marlene's survival as his way in, Barret tells Dyne that the girl is still alive, and the two of them can return to Midgar together and see her. Against all good sense, Dyne not only ignores Barret's offer, but says the two men have to fight. If Dyne wins, he actually suggests he's going to murder his own daughter so he can reunite her with her dead mother. Faced with no other option in the face of Dyne's insanity, Barret fights his old friend, and wins. In the aftermath, Barret asks Dyne what's going to happen to Marlene, given that his friend has seemingly given up on any hope of a reunion. Dyne doesn't give a straight answer, instead asking Barret, in what's arguably the most tragic facet of this whole conversation, if Marlene, who was not even a year old when Corel was destroyed, if she would even remember her real father anymore. Furthermore, he argues that his hands are far too stained to carry her. The men are basically silent after that, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on here. But to me, Barret's refusal to stand down suggests, even though his hands are just as stained as Dyne's, that he's not going to give up on Marlene, and I think that finally gets through to the other man. After a few seconds of silence, Dyne tosses his friend a memento of his wife Eleanor, asking him to bring it to Marlene. Barret's assurance to carry on his request is able, for what's certainly the first time in 4 years, to give Dyne a sense of grace. As he limps to the edge of the cliff, the sun shines on both him and the crosses memorializing his family. Though he may have found this fraction of grace, Dyne clearly still thinks of himself as too far gone to continue living. Though if he has to die, he can at least die knowing his daughter is in good hands. With one last injunction to Barret, to never let Marlene cry, Dyne stretches out his arms, becoming a metaphorical third cross, and throws himself off the cliff, ending his life. Now, for me, there's one major question that demands an answer given everything we just witnessed, and that question is this. Could Dyne have been saved? One can easily make an argument on either side. Recall that just a few paragraphs ago, I suggested that if Dyne had an honest-to-God living example of the third part of the survivors trio, he wouldn't be so screwed up, and if I'm reading Pat Holleman's book correctly, he suggests the same thing. That being the case, I'm actually going to take the contrary position and say no. I think Dyne was a lost cause from the very beginning. I argue this is evident from his very first appearance, the scene where he, Barret, and the elders of Corel discuss building the reactor. The different ways Barret and Dyne react, pun intended, tells us everything we need to know about their destinies. Barret agrees to it, while Dyne argues against it. As a thought exercise, let's imagine a timeline where Shinra doesn't carry out their false flag attack, that the reactor is built as promised and Corel continues to exist in peace. Context clues more than suggest it's a matter of when, not if, Corel's coal mining days become a thing of the past. In that sense, Dyne doesn't need the trauma of Shinra's attack to set him down this spiral of misanthropy. The slow decay of his hometown's coal industry would provide more than enough resentment for him to, sooner or later, wind up in the exact same position. Because, make no mistake, the biggest difference between Barret and Dyne, the thing that condemns the one and saves the other, is their definitions of happiness. For Dyne, happiness simply cannot exist without the glory days of Corel's coal mining past. For Barret, though he may have made a mistake in selling out to Shinra, one cannot blame him for making that choice given what he knew at the time. For him, happiness is not contingent on the existence of one single possible world. He'll fight for whatever he believes will be the best for his family and the rest of the world, and in that moment, it was working for Shinra. Further evidence of Dyne's damnation can be found in his final conversation with Barret. If all Dyne needs to get him back on track is that third facet of the survivors trio, then Barret himself should have been able to help him, but he wasn't. Dyne is right to question whether Marlene would have recognized him, but he need not raise that question with Barret. 4 years between two people who have been friends their whole lives is no time at all. And yet, this never seems to cross his mind. In what has to be one of the most subtly heartbreaking moments of this entire story, Dyne continues to dwell only on the loss of Corel, Eleanor, and Marlene, almost as if the survival of Barret means nothing to him. Thankfully, Barret does get through to him at the end, yet the only real change that occurs is that Dyne turns his vengeance away from the world and towards himself. I can't pretend to know what was going on in Dyne's head here, and honestly, I'm kind of grateful for that. I can only read his death symbolically. Dyne must have come to understand his mistakes, how dangerous his way of thinking really was, and that Marlene, in the world she's going to inherit, would be better off with people like Barret to lead it, not people like himself. Because this flexibility of method, this willingness to adjust what the best possible world looks like, is one of Barret's most valuable traits. We've already seen this in action, for instance when he relinquishes command to Cloud after leaving Midgar. But this flexibility is constant up till the very end. As the party prepares to infiltrate the North Cave for their final assault against Sephiroth, Barret is able to admit outright that his previous, terroristic methods were wrong because they made innocent people suffer. It's people like Barret, who do not define happiness according to one and only one narrow definition, who can admit that they're wrong and take another course of action if need be. That's why he's saved, while Dyne is damned. That's why he's a hero, and that's why the story of him and Dyne is so powerful.